What's up, everybody? Thralls here once again. I'm Necrotic Nick, and I have yet another album review for you. And one that I've actually been kind of excited to go over since I got into this band with their debut EP. So today we are going to go over the debut full-length from Ritual Fog, But Merely Flesh. This also comes out on the 29th of November on Transcending Obscurity Records. This band formed in 2021 in Memphis, Tennessee. This, again, is their debut full-length. I have been a fan of this band since their debut EP, Visions of Blasphemy, which I believe was sent to me by quite possibly one of the most classy individuals out there, Lonnie, over at his channel. He sent me a care package a while ago, and I believe their EP came with it on a cassette, and I jammed it. I was like, dude, this is really solid. Lonnie's always good for great recommendations, and this is like a recommendation that's right in my wheelhouse. This is very like old school death metal, lots of riffs, lots of groove. Like this band, you can definitely tell that their influences are pretty old school, I would say. But I'd also say that there's a fair amount of modern death metal mixed in with it. And yeah, like this is just kind of straightforward riff and go death metal. Like there's just tons of riff changes on here. It's very energetic, bombastic. You can feel the youthful energy behind it. The first actual track in here, Desolate Chasm, which the opening track, Mysticism, which points for being clever with the spelling of mysticism, kicks down the door with just rotten old school riffs, lots of double time grooves. You get some thrashier sections. This band's palette kind of across death metal, they definitely kind of pull a lot of influences from a lot of different camps. Like you have like more straightforward, like kind of meat and potatoes death metal grooves, like Bull Thrower, Obituary, stuff like that. But you also have like stuff I would say like is a little bit more along the lines of like Floridian death metal, where you get like a lot of thrash metal, like some Deicide, Malevolent Creation, stuff like that. Songs like Slime Blade and Demented Possession both have sections where you get into these like galloped blasts or galloped thrash beats, you know, kind of similar to like, honestly, like one of my favorite beats that always shows up when Igor Cavalera's behind the kit. A lot of like Beneath the Remains sort of vibes there. They're more peppered in there for accents to kind of like break up the rhythms, because you get a lot of like just heavy groovy patterns on here. The title track in particular, I would say, is like a little bit faster. Like it has a little bit more of that thrashy energy, though I would say that song is probably one of the most dynamic songs on the album, as it mixes in kind of everything that this band is about in one song, which, well, riffs and frequent riff changes are pretty much, I would say, like kind of the main thing on here. There's a little bit of like nuance that pops up in here in the way of like atmosphere or like kind of just changing the pace. Demented Possession and Carnal Ruin in particular have like some more sinister melodies to them. They feel a little bit more evil rather than, you know, just like flat out brutal, which I mean, this band does both pretty damn well. Sentient Chamber in particular, there's a whole section where everything drops out from just the bludgeoning riff fest to kind of just like open up the song with a more atmospheric passage. Like you get more like dive bombs and like cleaner tones. It's a way more haunting atmosphere. Honestly, it's kind of something that I would expect with a band named Ritual Fog. Like it feels like, you know, whatever is kind of floating in the fog or just behind it, like, you know, shadows darting out of the corners and you're kind of lost in this mist. Like it has that sort of vibe. Even the intro, Mysticism, is this awesome piece of synth work that just embodies everything like straight to video horror, and I always like that vibe. Though I will say, you know, when I heard those synths, like, man, I kind of hope they like employ those in some other way in the songs, because they sound really good. And, you know, like just some cool atmospheric breaks or like builds with them I thought would have been really cool. Sadly, they didn't show up. But at the same time, this isn't an intro I'm gonna like necessarily bitch about, because it is very mood setting. It's only like 35 seconds long, but it does its job pretty well. It like sets a good kind of like dark, sinister vibe, and admittedly the melody is pretty damn catchy. Again, a lot of this feels really focused on just like flat out old school death metal. Like this is all about riffs, lots of grooves and such. There are some moments on here that kind of step outside of that, or at least like riffs that I wouldn't say are like implicitly like flat out death metal. Carnal Pain, the main riff that carries that song in particular, it doesn't necessarily feel like a flat out death metal riff. Like it's definitely a metal riff. It has a good like heavy strum melody, but it sounds like a metal riff that could have popped up on like a litany of different 90s metal releases. Like regardless of like subset. Like I think it could have fit in on like a Prong album, or honestly like a lot of groove metal albums. Like it has a straightforward like 4/4 time beats. It big driving groove to it. It does transition to like some different stuff. Actually, this is one of the few tracks that really has like some pronounced blast beat sections. There's not a tremendous amount of like flat out blast beats on here, but it comes back to that riff as a good anchor point. And honestly, it's a riff that really stands out on this album because a lot of these riffs, definitely sound like what I would assume are a lot of their influences. Again, there's definitely a blend going on here of like, old school influences to new school influences. Like naturally, I got like some Morbid Angel vibes and some of the heavy tremolos, but honestly, like with some of the slower, more brooding sections with those tremolos, kind of sounds similar to Mortiferum. There's also stuff in here that reminds me a lot of like Undeath and 200 Stab Wounds. Especially 200 Stab Wounds. They kind of do that frequent riff change thing a lot like 200 Stab Wounds, and the fact that this is a pretty short album. It's under a half an hour, but it is absolutely chock full of riffs, and there's really like not a lot of breaks on it in terms of like, hey, let's pause for atmosphere, or like let's dry hump a riff for a while. A lot of the changes come kind of quick. The same can be said for the vocals on here. They're not entirely just like death metal vocals. They are almost kind of like interchangeable with, like some hardcore vocals occasionally. And there's definitely some like hardcore beat down grooves on here, but they're not just like straightforward gutturals all the time. Like there's definitely some layering with the backup vocals where you get some lower growls behind the main, I would say like mid-register growls on here. Those definitely have like a more like flat out death metal sound, but there's also some interesting vocal dynamics that show up on the title track and Slime Blade where it's more like theatrical, I guess, or like kind of like a desperate howl. It's more of a spoken word, I guess. It kind of sounds like something you would hear more or less on like a doom metal album rather than like a flat out death metal album. It was good to hear some variety. Admittedly, I kind of thought they were a little cheesy, like they didn't feel as though they kind of like gelled with like the overall sound of this album. Mainly because a lot of this is just, very brutal, very in your face. It kind of gets straight to the point. It doesn't, again, like meddle with atmosphere too much. This band mostly just kind of like locks in on a riff right away, and then it's kind of off to the races with riff changes, tempo shifts, some absolutely disgusting breakdowns, of course. I do like when they kind of get outside of that. Like there's some really good moments in here where they build up tension in the songs, namely Fog Sermon, which is, well, I mean, pretty much an instrumental. They only say like a few words on it, and honestly, it kind of works as a solid instrumental. Like it comes in very doom-laden. It's a very slow, brooding start. Like they kind of let the riffs drone a little bit. And then you get one spot where they yell out, I think probably the song title. I can't remember specifically. And then it instantly just gets thrashy and energetic. You get a lot of like stampeding drums on there. And on that song, I feel like they kind of lock onto stuff a little bit longer. They're not trying to like change up with the vocals. It's overall like just a really fun song. Again, the songs themselves are very condensed. Like there's only a couple on here over 4 minutes. Most of them hover around that 3 to 3.5 minute mark. You get a couple that are shorter than that. And within these shorter condensed songs, I will say that they are very busy and very busy with like mostly riff changes. And to a degree that kind of works against them a bit. This is one of those albums where you can definitely hear, again, all the band's influences. And when they do riff changes, you can hear like kind of which band they might be emulating a little bit more. And I kind of feel like they wanted to squeeze in as much riff work as possible into this, relatively short package in terms of like, a full length. And at points, it does feel a bit like Riff Salad. Now, in terms of being like a young band putting out your first album, I don't really see that much wrong with being an amalgamation of all your influences. At this point in the game, it's pretty hard to really come up with something like super original in death metal, so a lot of the times for me, it kind of comes down to execution. And I think this band executes their sound really well. It's just that I wish they would stick on to like some riffs a little bit more. I do appreciate the fact that they do bookend a lot of riffs, like the title track in particular, I think is probably the best song on the album. And it bookends the opening riff really well, along with like a lot of cool, clever transitions where I think they do, at least explore the songs a little bit more. I'd say everything on here lays a good foundation for their sound, but that exploratory factor, that's something I would like to see more in future releases, because I feel like a lot of good ideas are teased a little bit in favor of just like transitioning to the next part. And while you can argue that definitely keeps the foot on the gas, it keeps the songs interesting, it also can derail certain moments. Like, it's one of those where like, yeah, you have a solid riff, instead of like changing over to like the next thing where it completely changes the song, maybe build on the riff, add some more lead melodies. Leads aren't like super prevalent on here. The almost instrumental Fog Sermon is probably the song that has like one of the most notable leads, namely because it is a lot longer. Most of the time you're getting a lot of like dive bombs, which are very effective. They do add some atmosphere, and you get some shorter, squealier leads. But I definitely feel that if these songs were like a little bit longer and they did, draw out some parts, there would be more room for, more clever dynamics in them. But again, I feel like they have a good foundation. Even the production on here is a nice kind of like throwback, more raw, like almost analog sounding production. It sounds appropriately murky for their style. The guitars have like a more like 90s death metal tone to them. The drums sound nice and natural. So not only do I think that this band kind of got off to a pretty solid start, I still think there's like a lot of potential in here because they have a lot of like just like the foundational stuff. Like this band's got riffs, like no fucking doubt there. It's just the structuring of the song sometimes. It just gets a little busy. And again, giving things a little bit more breathing room on here, I think will probably work to this band's benefit. So overall, I'm gonna give this 3.5 stars. I still think this is a really solid release. It definitely has, some issues in terms of like being a little transition happy and trying to maybe condense a ton of ideas into a relatively short release, but this checks off a lot of things that I like about death metal in general. It's very riff driven. I think the production's solid. The songs are intense. There's a lot of cool dynamics. I just think they need to explore some of them a little bit more. You have hardcore beatdown grooves. There's some death doom moments on here. Lots of thrashy sections, occasional like brutal blasting, and of course, a fuck ton of groove. All these things I like a lot. So I am actually really eager to hear what they do next. And I do think that this is an improvement over their EP in terms of like songcraft. They are definitely getting better with each release. If you're a big fan, again, of, I would say like Bull Thrower is definitely in here. There's definitely a bit of DSI, but again, 200 Stab Wounds, Undeath, a lot of like, newer death metal bands, Coffin Rot, Green Witch, I would say is kind of comparable to these guys too. Check this album out and definitely check out the EP too as well. I think that one's really solid. So if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up. And if you are new to the channel, subscribe because we do stuff like this all the time. We also have memberships now. They were only 99 cents, and our Lone Perk is doing a members-only stream, which we will be doing more of those in the future. Our first one, I think, went pretty well. We definitely want to get some more focused subjects on there because, we want to make these streams kind of stand out a little bit from our usual streams where we just, sit around and bullshit with you, which we absolutely love, and we absolutely still will do. So yeah, we're going to probably talk about that a little bit more maybe in the community section or in other videos in terms of what you guys would like to talk about specifically in terms of like a themed stream from us. Of course, we also still have stupid emojis. They will only get dumber, I promise, because I know us. And yeah, this is the new, more direct way to support the channel as we're trying to get away from Patreon, and this kind of helps us with StreamYard, and I know we're looking at like other alternatives there because StreamYard's definitely getting expensive. But again, we like it because it works. Either way, if you would like to join up, there's a join button down below. And we also still have our store with our t-shirts and hats as well, which is linked down below at thrallsmetal.com. And regardless, if you join or buy a shirt or whatever, know that we appreciate the hell out of you guys. It is absolutely still 100% amazing doing this. We are approaching, God, is it our 6th year here soon in terms of doing Thralls? It's been an amazing journey. It honestly only gets better the longer we do this because, I feel like we keep building this awesome fan base. You guys absolutely 100% drive this channel. Well, that and the metal too, we got to be fair. But yeah, this has just been an amazing run, and it is large in part to you guys. So one more big thank you because you guys are absolutely awesome, and we will catch you later.